So you said your name was Etsuki?
Yes, me, Etsuki.
Well, we're looking for a very specific kind of talent here at Viking Incorporated. It says here that you have several years' experience pillaging and slaying the enemies of your enemy. Is this true?
Me slay many enemies. My axe shall glisten in the blood of your enemies.
Oh, well, that's great. Just go ahead and join up with the caravan out back, and they'll let you know what to do from there. And congratulations on joining Viking Incorporated. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 2 of To Play or Not to Play. On this episode, we'll be covering a newly released game by the indie game studio Stoic. A swirl of controversy has been in the air since this game's release, so let's hop right into things and take a look at the Banner Saga. So, what is the Banner Saga? Well, it's a single-player Viking-themed tactical RPG that takes place in another world. In this world, the sun has vanished, and the gods are supposedly dead. The various Viking clans are in turmoil, and many have chosen to travel and investigate the issue, while others are content to remain in their cities and small villages. The story splits between two groups of Vikings on different sides of the map as their individual stories and the stories of those they encounter along the way accumulate in each chapter until they finally and inevitably converge at the end of the game. If you're wondering where this game and studio came from, well, it originally started with a trio of guys that left BioWare. These are Alex Thomas, Arne Jorgensen, and John Watson. This was after they had worked on the MMO Star Wars The Old Republic. They wanted to make a game that they actually wanted to play, and thus the Banner Saga and Stoic Game Studio came to be. Now, you may have heard the name the Banner Saga before, and that's because a game called the Banner Saga Factions came out in February 2013 as a free multiplayer game. It utilizes the same combat system and graphic style, but it's a great way to get a taste of combat and see if it's up your alley. Let's jump into the graphics first. One thing that is undeniable about this game is that it's without a doubt pleasing to the eye. The animated sequences, characters, and backgrounds are almost all hand-drawn, and it really shows. There's a great amount of detail in the character portraits in the world. Watching your caravan move across the landscapes almost like watching a moving painting as the world comes alive around them. I have absolutely no complaints about the art style, and, in my opinion, it was a huge breath of fresh air to see this done in this way. Even the battle animations are fantastic to behold, as they used a technique called rotoscoping, which gives them an extremely unique feel. Watching my characters perform the tasks that I set before them was never a dull experience. Now, this may be off-putting to some people, but don't expect a lot of movement in the animated sequences. Usually when characters are talking, there will be the absolute minimum of movement, such as an article of clothing blowing in the wind, or their eyes blinking. Trust me when I say this isn't laziness, but rather a visual style that they chose to go with. I personally feel that adding any more movement to these scenes would have just been distracting with the way they were presented. With the above in mind, the Banner Saga gets a very strong point under play for its excellent hand-drawn graphics and unique visual attributes. Now, let's talk about the story. There are two main groups of people in the game that you're following. First, the normal humans who live on much of the flatlands. And then there's the Varl, large giants which are typically several times larger than men, and can easily overpower them. In both caravans you'll be traveling with a mixture of men and Varl, and both sides of their stories will be told along the way, as they tend to have different perspectives on how to deal with the various situations that arise. The story starts off with a group of Varl visiting the human governor in Strand, the capital city. Upon arriving, they find one of the chieftains and his men attacking the governor, and generally making a mess of the place. The Varl make short work of them, save the governor, and then you're set free in the city where you can snoop around a bit and get a better idea of what's really happening. Next, on the other side of the map, you are introduced to a group of humans whose home is being ransacked by the Dredge. They gather what supplies they can, quickly get everyone into some wagons and start fleeing the village as it continues to be overrun. The Dredge are the main villains in this game, and you'll be facing them in various battles along the way. Unlike humans in Varl, they mostly wear extremely heavy black armor. Even the ones that are in lighter armor wear masks, so you never really get to see what they look like. At one point later on in the game, you do get a short description of their appearance, but you never visually see it. One of the main draws of this game is the decision making along the way. Almost every decision you make has some sort of a reward or a consequence, and you need to keep that in mind as you go. Making random decisions can have serious consequences, even 3 or 4 hours later in the story. I like that my decisions in the game carry weight. If I take too many people, then I may struggle to feed them, and later they'll start starving. Or if I take a group of people in my caravan and offer them food and shelter, they may later on steal supplies and run away when the opportunity arises. That's just a couple of the smaller examples. Your main heroes that you utilize in the battle can and will die as the story progresses based on the decisions you've made. You may think someone is safe, only for a decision you made in one chapter to suddenly slap you in the face and cause their death. For the most part, this decision making works decently, but I do have some serious issues with how it's implemented. First of all, more often than not, there's a very little hint of what the consequences of a decision will be. I suspect this is to add replay value, but you may have several options that all make sense, but one of them will cause the character to die because of something random that you could never predicted. It reminds me of the old MUDs from back in the day where you'd have several decisions on your next action. You'd go right and all of a sudden the game would be like, "A dragon has eaten you, game over." Is it always fair? Not really, but neither is life. I think this is what the developers are getting at here, and that you don't always know what the consequences of your decisions will be, and you just need to do what seems right at the time. Even so, I feel that some of these scenarios were rigged a little bit, or not done as well as they could have been, and that detracted from the game a bit for me. Also, and while this is minor, it is something I feel is worth pointing out. There were a few typos in the script and dialogue at times which stood out to me. While I can understand that these sort of things are easy to miss, I hope they spend a bit more time in the future on editing their text or outsource that particular aspect so they can ensure it's free of typos in the final product. It can be very distracting to have an extra letter or word inserted where there shouldn't have been any in a mostly text-based game. With all of this being said, there is an issue that I'd like to bring up. One thing the developers are very clear about is that this is supposed to be a self-contained game. The Kickstarter this came from was to cover the production of a single game. Any other games in the series would be on their own dime and would, ultimately, be optional releases. There's no real incentive for them, aside from their own desire to do so, to create more games in the series, and thus the problem. The ending of this game doesn't really resolve anything that actually happened in the game. It leaves many loose threads, and we don't even get so much as exposition after the credits to wrap things up. So while this is supposed to be a self-contained game, it doesn't do a good job of doing that. You can very much tell that they want to continue things in Chapter 2. The idea behind the Banner Saga, per the developers, is to split it across 3 chapters in 3 games. These will be full games and priced accordingly. What they need to do for the next game, in my opinion, is ensure that the story ends in a satisfying way. I'm not talking about a happy ending or anything of the sort, but rather the questions that have been raised during the game and the events that have occurred are concluded in a satisfying way at the ending. I can say that this is definitely something that didn't occur in the first game, and so that's a black mark against it in my opinion. Those playing this with the story will likely be very disappointed with how unresolved it is. So, in the story department, the Banner Saga gets 1 point under play for the uniqueness and the era of the plot. Very few games delve into Vikings, and those that have rarely do them so well. However, it gets 2 points under Don't Play for the typos in the script and the rush and unresolved ending. Typos are a big deal, and this is something they need to avoid in their future releases. And for a story-driven game, they need to do a better job of actually telling the story. At this point, we're down to the meat and potatoes of the game. As I said earlier, this is a tactical RPG. You have a basic party management system where you can rank up and customize the stats of each of your heroes, and these are in towns and camps. Then you initiate the battle and set up the battle order of your party. The further left someone is, the sooner their turn will come up. So it's usually to your advantage to have your big, high armor, high strength guys go first, while your weaker guys go last so you can position everyone accordingly. Once in combat, you have a pretty standard field to fight in. You're allowed to rearrange your characters before combat starts, and then you're off. The combat system in this game is actually unique in that the character's strength is also their HP. As they take damage, the amount of damage they can put out is also decreased. If an enemy's armor is higher than your strength, then there's a chance that your attack will be deflected. So you need to keep that in mind when attacking. Since the Dredge have such a high armor, in most cases, you need to attack their armor stat first before you can use that effectively to kill them. As their armor decreases, the amount of damage your characters can do in a single attack increases. A controversial part of this combat system is that because of the way it works, it's actually more beneficial for you to maim enemies and leave them at 1 strength than it is for you to kill them. As you kill them off, the other guys ultimately get more turns. So you have 8 enemies on the field, and you kill 2 of the weaker ones, but leave 2 of the stronger ones untouched, and those 2 stronger guys will have more turns to beat on your guys. But, if you leave the 2 weaker ones alive, then their turns will be ultimately useless to the enemy. In many cases, the general strategy comes down to the maiming of the entire enemy, and then killing them all at once. After you're down to 1 enemy left, you enter pillage mode, where everyone on your side gets a turn before the enemy does, and this allows you to quickly finish them off without them getting an unfair advantage. For the most part, this works well. There are several problems with the combat system, however. First of all, it is incredibly repetitive. When compared to a game like Final Fantasy Tactics that had large and varied geographical areas to fight in, this kept the game interesting and allowed some very diverse strategies on how to build your characters and tackle various situations. You have none of that here. Next, the way you tackle an enemy is largely the same throughout. Maim the hardest hitting guys, then the weaker ones, and finally kill everyone off. There's no incentive to ever play differently. This is a huge flaw in the implementation of their system, and I feel that if they had put some more resources into it, they could have really made this the next must-have strategy RPG. Unfortunately, because of the redundancy of the combat, it ends up average at best. Lastly, there are some problems with the actual field itself. First of all, you're locked into a single point of view, which means there's times where you can't actually see characters, or you end up moving a character to the wrong spot because you can't see the tiles they're supposed to be on. In some cases, it's difficult to even tell which enemy you have selected for attack because everything ends up obscured. There's also times where there's tooltips or dialogue during combat and they obscure part of the board. You end up having to wait for these to go away because you can't see characters or tiles through them. The Banner Saga gets 1 point under play for the interesting use of the strength system as both HP and attack power. Don't get me wrong, this is pretty unique, and I haven't seen any other tactical RPG that's done things exactly this way. Unfortunately, the maps you have to fight on are dull and repetitive. The combat tactics have no real variety, and several UI and camera issues take away some of the fun from the combat. Thus, I give it 3 points under Don't Play, as these can all severely detract from the game for many people. And now we go into the sound. One of the big selling points of this game is that Austin Wintory, the composer of the Journey soundtrack, wrote the orchestrated score for the Banner Saga. His influences here are plain, and there's without a doubt some fantastic tracks in the mix. Unfortunately, I feel that Stoic didn't effectively use the music in many scenarios. The music rarely looped, and oftentimes you'd hear maybe 30 seconds of the song before it trailed off, or you would find yourself traveling in near silence. The combat music, instead of being something that really hyped you up for a Viking battle, sounded more like an orchestra tuning their instruments before the recital actually began. It's truly a shame they didn't utilize the music better because, as I feel for the most part, the performers really came through here. There's definitely some tracks that really caught my attention as I progressed through the game. But now we come to the part that is one of the biggest controversies since the game came out, and that's the voiceovers. While there are only roughly 5 minutes of voice sections in total throughout the game, they are only in English, with some rather...
All we've done is traded one struggle for another. Now that there are no more threats to war against, we war against ourselves.
Yeah...
I am in a bad way, my friend. Help me finish this fight and I'll gladly send you on your way with double our king's tithe. Take any man you need. They're loyal. I promise you that.
I give the Banner Saga 1 point under play for the music. While the developers didn't use it as effectively as they could have, and the battle music was poor, the overall soundtrack was done well from what I've heard, so I don't want to take that away from them. I would give a negative point for the voiceovers, but because they encompass such a small part of the game, they're ultimately negligible, and I don't feel they should hold any weight over whether someone purchases this game or not. One more issue that I wanted to mention is the options menu. While this has no real effect on the game itself, it's worth noting since there's basically no options to be found. You can turn the music on and off, the sounds on and off, you can adjust the volume, and there's full screen and windowed only. No resolution options whatsoever. You can change the difficulty at any time during the game, but that's about it. There's no controller support, no key mappings or rebindable keys. You can't adjust the volume of anything. You can't even change the brightness of the game itself. There's a lot missing here, and the studio has thus far not acknowledged this or mentioned any sort of additions or improvements. Since they're planning on porting this game to the iPad, I have a feeling that what you see is all you're going to get in that regard. So, if that's going to have an effect on your purchase, then so be it. I personally find this unacceptable for any game on PC these days, and so I'm giving it 1 point under Don't Play for the unacceptable lack of even the most basic options in their menu system. I don't think we should, as gamers, stand for this kind of thing, and it's to our benefit to call developers out on this when they do these kind of lazy development practices. I don't care how large or small the studio is. Adding these features is a basic for any PC game, and the options need to be there. To wrap things up, the Banner Saga is a fresh perspective on a stale genre with some pretty neat ideas along the way. The final score for this game is 4 points under Play and 6 points under Don't Play. There are things to love about the game, and definitely some replay value here. At 8 to 12 hours for a single playthrough, and many different options to make along the way, you can easily get at least 2 playthroughs out of this game. But, the game also does a lot of things not as well as it could have. Considering they received over $700,000 from their Kickstarter, there's times where I felt disappointed with what they actually did with that money. The current pricing for this game on Steam is $25 USD, and if the reasons to play the Banner Saga outweigh the reasons not to play it for you, then I believe you'll be fulfilled with your purchase. However, if the reasons under Don't Play weigh you in that direction, then I would recommend picking this game up when it's $15 or less, as you would ultimately be unsatisfied with your purchase. Especially since it's only the first in a 3-part series, and you'll need to pay for the other 2 games, as well should you decide to continue. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next episode of To Play or Not to Play. This is Strikeoff, checking out.